What's up guys, and welcome back to another Sm.I.E video. Today I wanted to touch a little bit with you guys on a key skill, really in any aspect of life, but it is a really big skill in the world of IT, and that is troubleshooting. That's right, this is a major skill set, and I just want to run over some pointers with you guys today on how you can develop this skill, and I'm going to do that by way of some simple lab questions and examples. It's going to be a quick 3-part series, so if you're ready, let's go. So what exactly is troubleshooting? I'm pretty sure there's some fancy meaning or description for what this is written down somewhere, but it basically, quite simply, is just the process of figuring out what's wrong. That sounds simple enough, right? However, this skill is apparently not so simply acquired after all. Now, troubleshooting is an art. There is definitely an art to it, and different methodologies will yield different results. And to be fair, I'm not even sure that many people realize that they're practicing one form of troubleshooting or the other. It is my experience though, from conducting a number of lab interviews with job-seeking candidates, that troubleshooting is not so much a skill that everyone possesses, and those who possess it do so to varying degrees. So for the next couple of videos, I'm going to give you some pointers that hopefully you might find helpful. It's gonna mostly be practical stuff, so let's see how it goes. Firstly, as we mentioned, everybody does troubleshooting differently, but there are 3 types of troubleshooting methodologies that are pretty common, and those 3 are as follows. So first is the top-down method, or something called the top-down method. Now this method of troubleshooting basically dictates that first you understand what the overall purpose of the solution is supposed to be. What is it supposed to deliver? And then once you understand that intention behind the solution, that is to say what exactly it's supposed to do, then from there you can start to break down the different steps that lead up to the ultimate delivery of the solution. And then through identifying the steps that lead up to the ultimate delivery of the solution, you can possibly identify at which stage of this process the issue may actually lie. Then when you identify the stage of the process that the issue lies, then you can probably identify which element of that process is actually causing the issue. A good example of this is, and a pretty fairly simple example of this, is your kitchen faucet or your bathroom faucet or whatever, a faucet in your house, right? Let's say you turn the faucet on and there's no water coming out of the faucet. That's a problem. Ultimately, what is that faucet supposed to do? This is where now you're identifying the big picture here. What exactly is the faucet supposed to do? It's supposed to deliver water to you. It's supposed to give you access to water, right? Now, how does that water get to this point where it's coming out that faucet and being delivered to you? Now those are the steps of the whole process of water being delivered out the faucet. Now it's gonna be connected from the outside of your house, coming in, connected from your main water supplier, and that's gonna be coming into your house through a series of pipes, and along the way there may be a series of lock-offs. There may be a lock-off even below that very faucet that you're trying to use, right? So now you've identified, okay, this is how the water comes into the house. These are the stages. It comes through the main connection to your national water supplier or wherever, and then it comes into the house along the series of pipes, and at this stage or that stage there may be a lock-off, and you start to think, okay, let's see what's happening. So you check your lock-offs, and your lock-offs are on, or maybe they're off and that is the problem, or you check the lock-offs and you realize that the lock-offs are on but you still have no water to your faucet, and then when you look, NWC cut off your water. And that's a very specific example in terms of NWC, because a lot of you might not know who the National Water Commission is, unless your water supplier is called the National Water Commission or NWC. But yeah, that's one example of looking at things from a top-down method. Next up is the problem-focused method. Now this is essentially where you are just looking directly at the fault and trying to find common factors that may have caused this to be happening with a view to a resolution. So at this point, you may actually branch out from looking at the issue to maybe looking at the previous process or whatever device sits before this one that's giving you an issue, or even the following process or the following device, to figure out what may be at fault, or to properly identify the actual fault and not just a symptom of the fault. And then you try and resolve it, but then the focus usually remains on the immediate error. For example, hammer falls off a table and hits you on your toe. There's a problem, a painful problem, in that your toe is now hurting and the hammer has fallen off the table. So there you have two problems, right? Immediate resolution to that problem, looking at the issues that the hammer fell off the table. Pick the hammer up, put it back on the table. You solved one problem. Haven't solved the other problem, the other immediate issue of your toe, which is probably going to need some ice or a pain cream or something. But you pick the hammer up, put the hammer back on the table, that solved the immediate issue. However, the underlying issue that's associated with that now, as in why did the hammer fall off the table in the first place? Is the table not level? Is the table broken? Is something else happening there? That kind of stuff tends to get overlooked when you're focusing on the problem and not looking at the other areas that lead up to it, because it may be an underlying issue that caused this problem. Then there is the third methodology, which is the bottom-up method, which is basically where you start looking at the problem from the bottom up to where the issue is currently, or wherever you're experiencing the issue currently. So in this case, you start to investigate the processes and the events and equipment and anything that lies before the current issue that you're having, that leads up to where your issue lies. You start to investigate that before you dive into the specific area or device which is at fault. And in doing this, what you're trying to do is you're trying to see if there may have been any break in the process or any issue before that may have been the cause or may be the cause of your current issue. For example, very simple example, you have an electric stove. You turn the knob on the electric stove to turn the stove on, and the top of the stove or the burner is not heating up. First thing you do, probably check to see if the stove is plugged in. That's like a bottom-up methodology, because maybe the stove has a switch, right? You could have checked the switch as well to see if the switch is flipped or whatever the case may be. But first thing you do, check to see if the stove is plugged in. That's a bottom-up kind of methodology. Now, for me, as a general rule, I find that the top-down method is usually the best one to go with, because once you understand the objectives, then it's a bit easier to map the stage at which the process may be failing, because it's then easier to map the steps needed to complete the process. Alright, so now that we've talked about that, we're going to look through a few examples. Let's go. Alright, so we're going to look at about 3 examples throughout this short 3 video series, and we're going to start with question 1. I've jumped into one of my lab environments here, so we're going to start with question 1 in this lab environment, or example 1, to test our troubleshooting skills. So let's see what question 1 says. All right. Question 1 says, PCA is able to ping Google's public DNS IP 8.8.8.8 successfully. However, whenever a user tries to browse to Google's webpage, www.google.com, using a browser on PCA, the browser returns an error. Troubleshoot and resolve this browsing issue. All right, cool. So, question 1 basically says that from PCA, they can ping Google, but they can't browse to it. So, how would you resolve this? Of course, you're not going to answer me. So, let's look at it. Let's take it from the top down and look at it using the top down methodology. Right? So first question that we'd ask in that case is, what's the aim here? What are they trying to accomplish? Well, essentially, somebody's trying to get to Google. They're trying to browse, right? And what's the problem? Well, they can't browse from PC A. Basically, user is unable to browse. So how does one usually get to browse from a PC? Well, usually one opens a browser, types in a URL, say www.google.com, and then the browser takes them to the page. But in this case, they did that and it's not working. All right, so let's look at the steps, and we're gonna call this our what does one need in order to browse a web page checklist. So we can list the steps out here that we need in order to browse to the internet. So one of the very first things that you're gonna need is internet. So is there internet? Well, the question says that they can ping successfully. So let's check to see if there is internet. And in order for us to do that, we're gonna have to go to PCA. All right, so let's bring up PCA. And we're gonna need remote desktop for that. Let's go remote desktop, connect to PCA, which is 10.9.100. That's the IP address. And then we're gonna enter the password and connect to PCA. All right, so we are connected to PCA. Great. Okay, so what's the first thing that we're going to do here? We're going to test to see if they have internet. So let's do a ping test and check for ourselves. So we know 8.8.8.8 is Google's DNS. Let's check to see if we can ping it. And we are pinging it. Okay, so ping test came back successful. All right, so there is internet according to what's happening on this computer. Let's ping it again just to be sure. It wasn't a fluke the first time. All right, still getting a response. All right, cool. So there's internet. All right, so let's go back to our checklist. So next thing on the checklist that we need to check is whether or not there's access being allowed through a firewall, right? Now, we didn't see a firewall on the original topology document, so the only firewall that could be in play here is the firewall that's on the computer itself. So let's check the firewall on the PC to see if maybe the PC's firewall is blocking access to browsing. All right, cool. So we're back on PC. Now we're gonna check the firewall and see if the firewall is actually blocked. Easy way to do this. Oops, that's not what I want to. Let's right click here and just click search and just type in firewall, Windows firewall. That's what we want. What? Oh, did I spell firewall? I did. Firewall. Let's click on Windows firewall. Here we go. So here is a firewall, but it's saying that the firewall is turned off. All right. So our next item to check off our checklist is the firewall. So the firewall is off. So there is no firewall that's blocking browsing. So there you go. Check the firewall off. So it's definitely not the firewall that's causing the problem. All right, cool. So let's go back to our checklist again. So what's the next thing that we need in order to get out to the internet? A browser, a working browser. So is there a working browser on the computer? Well, let's check the PC. So we're back on the PC environment. All right, so here's Google Chrome. Let's open Google Chrome. All right, Chrome opens fine. Let's try and browse www.google.com. There we go. Aha. So browser seems to try and get to Google, but here's an error that comes back. It says this site can't be reached. Server IP address could not be found. Try checking blah, 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 blah. A bunch of different stuff. But look here. It says DNS probe finished bad config. So there's a reference there to DNS. Let's click details. When you click details, it actually says check your DNS settings. Okay, so here's a reference to DNS. All right, so the next thing that we're gonna want to check then is gonna be the DNS based on what the browser returned, right? All right, so let's just bring up an ipconfig. Let's bring up command prompt. Let's just run an ipconfig /all. Let's look at everything to see if DNS is configured on this machine. All right, so DNS is configured on the machine. We're looking at, let's see, here's the DNS 10.99.100, but that's the same IP address as the IP of the machine itself. It says IPv4 address 10.99.100. The DNS is the same IP address, so that would mean then that DNS would have to have been installed on this and it's functioning as its own DNS server. All right, cool. So let's check that. Since it says DNS is configured for that, let's check that. If there's DNS on the server. Again, easy way to do this, just search, type in DNS and see if it comes up with something. Nothing. It came up with nothing. So there's no DNS on this computer. All right, if that's the case, then first thing that we're gonna do here, let's check the DNS configuration for this NIC interface. The Ethernet 0, let's go. So you see the static IP information configured here and the DNS server information. Well, it's saying that it's DNS itself, but DNS isn't configured. So let's change the DNS server and use a public DNS server 8.8.8. Since we know we can reach it, let's use that as the DNS for this computer. Now, next thing is to check and see if that resolved the issue. So let's open up the browser and let's try and get back to google.com. Let's try it, www.google.com. Enter. There we go. I mean, it defaulted to google.com, so you saw that page come up, but it could have also been cached. So let's try another site. Let's try, what's a good site? Let's try www.yahoo.com. Competitive. Let's see. Yahoo.com. And boom. There you go. We have liftoff. You're able to actually log into Yahoo. So that actually fixed the problem. So the issue here was the actual DNS entry. DNS entry on the server was incorrect. So there you have it, folks. Troubleshooting at its finest. All right. So that seems like a long process, doesn't it? It kind of was. I mean, sometimes it is a long process, but not all the time. Like even in what we just did, that process didn't have to be that long. So, for example, when we sent the ping test to Google's DNS 8.8.8.8, we could have actually, and that came back successful, we could have actually did a ping test to, let's say, www.google.com, and that would have come back unsuccessful. And once that came back unsuccessful, that would have been an indication that the domain name resolution was not working. Domain name resolution is handled by DNS. So we could have taken shorter steps to come by the same conclusion that there was an issue with DNS. But as an example, I wanted to show you guys that there are different ways that you can go about troubleshooting stuff. And while the process isn't always easy, it is generally relatively simple. Alright, so that's it for today. If you guys enjoyed today's video, don't be shy. Please feel free to go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel and hitting that notification bell so you don't miss any of the content that we post. Join us on the next video when I look at another example on how you can help improve your troubleshooting. But until then, I'll catch you guys on the next one.